Well, hi, and thanks for stopping by the Pellets and Pistons Airgun channel. Today we're here to take a closer look at the RWS Diana Model 50 TO1. Now, you might have caught a glimpse of this in my earlier video where I thought I'd introduce you to a few of the new air rifles I purchased. And this is one of that small lot of guns that I picked up. Now, this is an interesting gun for a couple of reasons. One is because it's an underlever. Two, because of its 3/4 length full wood stock. And three, because it's a tap loader. And if you're not familiar with a tap loader, check this out. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with a tap loading air rifle, the way that you would load the air rifle would be to cock the gun. That would be your first step. Second step would be to load a pellet. And to load a pellet with a tap loader, you'll notice that there's a hole here at the top of the receiver. And there's also a lever to the left of that hole. In this case, it's to the left of that hole on this particular gun. In order to load the pellet, you would push this lever forward. And what that will do is expose another hole in a tap, which is a drum that runs across the receiver here. And that drum has a hole bored right through it. So when you line it up, you can drop your pellet in and then give it a little shake in this case to get it to drop in, and then bring the lever back, which now puts that pellet in line with the barrel. And that's how you load a tap loader. Okay, so back to the specs of the gun. The gun comes in at 44 3/4 inches in length, which is a pretty long gun. It's certainly not short by any standards. The barrel is 18 3/4 inches long. It comes in with the scope on it at 9 pounds 13 ounces, so that's pretty darn close to 10 pounds. So not a lightweight gun by any standards. It's producing pretty good power. It's in 177 caliber, this particular gun is, and it's given me around 750 feet per second with Crosman Premier hollow point pellets. That translates into about 9.9, might as well call it 10 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. It's got some nice press check ring. It's got a rubber recoil pad, which is kind of nice. It's got some very good sights, a fully adjustable rear sight, which you can rotate the notch to get 4 different shapes of a notch on the rear sight. Front sight allows for interchangeable inserts, so that's very nice. It's got an automatic safety, it's got an adjustable trigger, and it's also got one heck of a buzz. And as you guys know, I can't stand a buzz. So this video is not only to introduce you to the gun, but introduce you to the second segment of this video, which is where we're going to tear it down and we're going to get rid of that buzz. And so let's do a comparison. We'll shoot it a couple of times now for you to give you an idea what it sounds like. And here's how you load the gun. Again, I showed you in that little clip, but we're going to go over it in more detail now. So we're going to cock the gun. We turn the cocking lever. It snaps neatly into place. I'm going to expose the tap hole. Oops, and dump my pellets all over my bench. I'm going to drop a pellet into that hole, and I'm going to close it, and just making sure it went in straight. All right, so automatic safety off. Now take a listen. We're going to shoot down into the dirt. See, hear that buzz? It's not terrible, but it's there, and I want to make it go away. Cock the gun, return the lever, open the tap, insert a pellet, close the tap, safety off, buzzing gun. So stick around. We're going to dive into this rifle, and I'm sure we're both going to learn something on this one. This ought to be great. Never took one of these apart before, so it's going to be a learning experience, and it's going to be a good one. Thanks again, folks, for stopping by the Pellets and Pistons Airgun channel. So we're ready to break down the rifle, and the first step is to remove the cross bolt, which holds the underlever in position and becomes the pivot point for that underlever. Now that requires the use of a spanner wrench, but I didn't have one, so instead I just used a small pair of needle nose pliers. Holding the bolt on the opposite side with the proper fitting screwdriver, I was able to unscrew the spanner nut. Once the threads were free, I was able to tap out the bolt by gently tapping from the opposite side. And there we go, there's the hinge bolt. Now a punch from the opposite side should push that spanner nut out so that we don't lose it on the shop floor. Now the under lever is free to be removed from the rifle. The next step is to remove the pin, which is just above the trigger towards the rear of the rifle. A few gentle taps should do the trick. Now you'd think that the stock was free to be removed at this point, but you'd be mistaken, because there's one more spanner nut threaded down over the under lever latch pin where the under lever is housed. So back to the trusty needle nose pliers, and off will come that spanner nut. Now pay attention here, because I didn't. And once the stock was ready to be removed, I went ahead and removed it, and it was sticking a little bit. And so when it went with a little bit of a surprise, and that meant the stock kind of flipped up in the air, and as it did, I lost that spanner nut because I didn't have the forethought to remove it and put it aside before I removed the stock. So keep that in mind when you disassemble a rifle like this one. There it goes. I was fortunate that it landed on the bench and that I heard it fall, but I almost lost it. So if you look in this picture, you'll see a little C-clip that's wrapped around a pin, and that just drive that pin out and that will remove the whole trigger group, and it's a very simple matter of putting it back in the same way, and I'd recommend doing that. I didn't show that on camera, but it's definitely worth the extra step. There's a couple of pins towards the rear of the receiver, and those pins have to be removed in order to release the tension from the mainspring. Now the first one will come out without any real issues, but when we take the second one out, we better be sure that we're restraining the mainspring from flying across the room. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the punch to hold the action together until I'm ready to remove the punch, thus releasing the tension on the mainspring. And you'll see that in just a second. So now we're going to go ahead and remove that pin, and when we do, we better be restraining it, because otherwise we'll have a little missile across the shop. Okay, so now in theory, all of the tension is on that punch, but when I remove it, the action does not come apart. So a little tap with a hammer was all it took. So now we have the mainspring and spring guide out of the gun. The only thing left to do is remove the piston. So I use my punch and just a few gentle taps with the brass hammer, and very gentle. You don't need to use much force. The piston should slide very nice and evenly. And once you get it down near the bottom, you're going to have to slide out the piston sleeve in order to remove the cocking shoe. So once you've got the piston far enough out, you can go ahead and grab that sleeve from inside, and that should slide right out of the piston. And that'll leave the cocking shoe free to fall down inside the piston. From that point, you can just dump it out of the action. There we go. Now the piston should be free to be removed from the rifle as well. And there you go. We've completely disassembled the gun. I was surprised to find a leather piston seal. This gun was built in 1984. I would have thought they'd be using synthetics by then, but evidently they're using leather, and for good reason. That seal is in perfect condition. I have every intention of reusing it. So I ordered a new spring, and I also made a new top hat, which the spring was not equipped with originally. So the top hat is to help quiet down the gun, and the new spring is because the old one had quite a bit of cant to it that I didn't want to put back in the rifle that way. So there's the top hat installed. So now it's just time to reassemble. You can notice in this picture that the original spring is up in the left-hand corner of the mat there, and that spring is so badly canted that there's no way I was going to put that back in the rifle. Here I'm displaying that the spring guide is so tight that it's almost impossible to remove it from the spring, and that should help to quiet it down as well. You can see here the cant when you compare the two springs side by side. So that's why we replaced the spring. The piston seal again is leather. Now I've discovered a little too late that I over-oiled that piston seal. I was talking to a good friend who explained to me that you only want to soak it for a little while and then let it drain for a few days. And I soaked it for a long while, several days, in fact, probably a couple of weeks, and then just wiped it off with a paper towel before putting it back in the rifle. So at the end of this video, you're probably going to notice there's a little smoke coming out of that barrel. That thing's going to be detonating for quite a while. But at any rate, back to reassembly. The first step will be to grease the rear bearing surface of the piston. Now this good friend of mine also highly recommends buttoning pistons, so I may try my hand at that in a future video. So there, I didn't put much on this piston. I had somebody complain in a recent video, or recently, that I over-greased one of my guns, but so to make him happy, I under-greased this one. So now the piston can go back in the gun, but you don't want to seat it all the way in because we need to reinstall that cocking shoe. So line up the slot with the slot in the tube and the slot in the piston. Make sure they're aligned properly. Now you're going to need that piston sleeve and the cocking shoe. Just clean it up a little bit. And then before you install it, it would be a good idea to grease the bearing surfaces of it as well. So a little more moly grease here. Alright, the tricky part is getting everything together at the proper time. Now there's a washer that goes in that also needs to have some moly on it, and that's going to go inside the piston sleeve, and that's supposed to be a bearing surface for the spring, but now that we have a top hat, I'm not even sure it's necessary, but I'm going to go ahead and put it back in anyway. So there goes your piston sleeve. You grab a hold of that cocking shoe, and I found a pair of angled needle nose pliers is about the best tool in the world for doing this job. So you're going to slide it in from the rear of the piston slot underneath the little bridge, and then you're going to grab it with a little pick so that you can pull it up into the slot where it rides, and while it's in that slot you can slide in your piston sleeve and that'll keep it from dropping back down into the piston. I hope all that makes sense. You may have to watch this a few times just to understand what I did. Next step is going to be to add some spring tar to this gun. I don't believe this is going to need much spring tar. It's just more for any residual vibration that I might have. So I'm not going to put as much as I normally would on a spring. I'm going to concentrate mainly on getting the spring coated well, but certainly not as much as I've done in previous videos. Alright, we're going to take that washer now that we've greased it, and we're going to drop that down inside so that it's at the fore end of the piston sleeve, and then the spring comes in behind that. You should be able to push everything in just with the spring itself. You'll get a little overhang, and that's why we're going to use a spring vise in order to put it back together. So I found a socket that was exactly the right size of the spring, the rear end of the spring plug here with the two holes in it. So with that socket in place, I was able to push that in exactly into position. And then I'm going to take one of those two pins and just get it started. I only want it to go in deep enough to hold the inner tube firmly in place with the outer tube, if that makes sense. And the reason for that is we still need to install the safety assembly. So now we're held together very precariously with just one pin, which is only driven in far enough so that we can get the safety to slide in. So here's what you're looking at. Now I put the second pin in just for the photograph, so you can see that the pins are not in very far, only enough to hold the assembly together, and then we push in the little detent spring, and then we can drive in the pins very carefully. These can be a little stubborn. You may have to spend some time adjusting the tension back and forth on your spring vise, but you'll get it if you're diligent. There's one, and there's two. Alright, now that everything's back together and held in place properly, we can pull it out and we'll test that safety. Seems like it's working. We'll check it again when we get this out of the vise. Definitely sounds right. Alright, now I'm going to put that trigger assembly back in. So I'll show you how to put it back in, and the reverse is how you take it out. It's very, very simple. It's just one pin. Push that little C-clip into place. Make sure it's all the way into place. And that's all there is to reinstalling the trigger group. Now it's time to put it back in the stock. Sorry, I'm off camera a little bit there. There we go. So we'll put it back together in reverse. We're going to put that pin back in. Now before you try to install that pin, it's a good idea to look down inside and maybe put a flashlight on the opposite side to make sure your hole is lined up. If it's not, you're going to need to move this trigger forward and backward until the hole lines up. You'll just adjust it forward and back until you can see clear through. Back to the needle nose pliers and the forward spanner nut. Snug that down good so that vibration doesn't loosen it up. And then we can go ahead and put the cocking lever back in, and that has to kind of step down and into a little notch in the piston. If you mess with it for a couple of seconds, you'll get it. It's not very hard. Then the cross bolt comes through. And the spanner nut on the opposite side. And once that's done, the gun is back together again, and all that's left is to see how we did. Okay, so the RWS Diana Model 50 TO1 has been reassembled with the new parts. That's the new spring, the new top hat, a little bit of spring tar, and I'm going to see how we did. Oh, by the way, the guide was a tight fit on the spring. I think I may have mentioned that already, so that's going to help as well. So we're just going to take a few shots and see if we were able to clear up that noise. But before we do, here's a clip of what it sounded like before we started. Buzzing gun. Okay, so let's see how we did. Let's see what kind of results we got. Load that tap. Alright, so before, buzzing gun. And after. Just a beautiful, nice, smooth, fast action with absolutely no buzz, no vibration. A little bit of dieseling, but that's to be expected because I really did oil that piston seal very well, that leather piston seal with neat's foot oil. And that's slightly flammable, so we're going to get a little bit of dieseling until that burns off. But I can tolerate that. We'll just have to shoot a few hundred shots before she settles down. Absolutely wonderful. I can't tell you how pleased I am with the way this job turned out. So one more time, here's what it sounded like before. Buzzing gun. And here's what it sounds like now. Wonderful. I'm so psyched about this. Can't tell you how happy I am. Now I can enjoy this rifle the way it was meant to be enjoyed instead of listening to that buzz and have it be a severe distraction for me. I really can't stand the buzzing rifles, and there's just another success story in my arsenal of guns that don't make any buzz sound whatsoever. So I want to thank you folks for stopping by the Pellets and Pistons Airgun channel. If you haven't subscribed already, please do that. Hit the bell if you want to be reminded of future videos, and by all means give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this one. Thanks so much folks. Have a great day.